Welcome back. So in this video we're going to look at the differentiated individual ontology. Now this is a very different way of looking at management than is the undifferentiated individual ontology. In this one what we see here is that every single circle is a big O. It's a big one. Okay? So what that means to you as a manager is you are saying that if you follow this ontology, you believe that everybody is a manager, everybody is a leader, and everybody is responsible. It almost is reminiscent of theory Y as we talked about earlier, right? So more or less as a manager, your job is less about kind of managing as it would be in the managing, especially through a moral authority, as it would be in the undifferentiated individual ontology, but rather it's about supporting. You believe that your role as a manager is not to dictate or to direct, but to support. To support people to be their best and to create systems that allow them to thrive. Okay? So here are some theories that you might see. People thrive when they're left to their own devices. You have workers, they're showing up, you have some sort of a task that you all have to do together, and you ask them, hey, what kind of support do you need to be successful? And I'm going to allow you to dictate almost the terms of your task. I might coach or I might mentor you though, right? And this approach you actually see a fair amount in Northern European countries, Scandinavia in particular. In these particular locations, a manager is less of a boss, but rather a senior colleague, a coach, or a mentor who's there to help you succeed. Okay? And some common theories, right? Outside of management, economic liberalism. You may have heard of laissez-faire, right? In other words, when it comes to the economy, government should not regulate people, but government should stay out of people's business because that's how everybody gets richer, when people are allowed to manage themselves. And of course, anarchism is another good example. Anarchism states it's a rejection of authority. It's allowing me to do whatever I want. Okay? And again, I think in certain circumstances, much like theory Y, this is very effective. And there are organizations that run this way. A great book that I read years ago was called Maverick by a gentleman known as, his name was Ricardo Simler. And he ran an industrials company in Brazil that made pumps and heavy machinery and things like this. And he had an organization where people worked on their own time and their own hours. Nobody had any sort of like parking space or office. You just came to work and worked when you wanted to. And you left when you wanted to, and somehow this was a company that survived like 9 recessions in Brazil because his whole thing was, how do I support the workers and then just leave them alone. Okay? Interestingly enough, I think that universities, especially with faculty, are run this way. Faculty, the thing that you're asking your professors to do is do great teaching and great research, service too, but teaching and research predominantly. And a lot of faculty are just better off being left to their own devices. They ask they get with their boss and say, hey, I need, $20,000 this year for research. Okay? And the boss says, here's your $20,000. You have a general university guideline to publish this much and teach this much. And what else do I need to get you support? I need pens, papers, computer, whatever. Okay, great, here's your pens, paper. And just go ahead and figure it out. Now it sounds, and again, whether it's, Simco or university faculty, it sounds very idyllic, right? That you can just allow people to manage themselves. And those people, of course, you're thinking, well, they can just fool around. They can sleep in or, not do their work or whatever. Of course, eventually you get fired, whether it's a Brazilian manufacturing company or a university position. But if you're a worker in this kind of an organization, so the undifferentiated individual ontology, one of the flaws is that there's a little bit of a fear component. There can be a fear component. If you don't act just like the boss, that there's a consequence associated with that. When you operate in this ontology, you're basically your own entrepreneur. And the fear winds up being letting yourself down. And what Ricardo Simler noticed was that the individuals that he gave the most freedom to were the ones that worked themselves the hardest. The ones that had the least separation from their personal and their work lives, they actually wound up working longer, harder hours. There's something about the freedom to not work which forces you to work harder. Now you're probably thinking, what in the world? Is this even applicable outside universities and outside of Brazil? I would argue yes, because when you see the current pandemic, there were, our coronavirus, which is dying out. Well, I don't know if it's dying out or not, but we're not talking about it as much anymore. You think about what happened during the pandemic and afterwards, or after the worst of the pandemic. When you started allowing people to work from home, you stopped treating them as much as employees, but you started almost treating them like entrepreneurs. You would give them broad goals, and yeah, you'd have meetings and check-in, but you give them broad goals and then the support that they needed to work from home. But then they had to manage it themselves. So if they're working at home and they want to sleep in till 10 o'clock, that's fine, but then they're going to have to work till 2 in the morning to make it up. If they need to, do stuff with their kids, that's fine, but then they've got to make it up. And what winds up happening is, even though your regular workday is 8 to 5 or 8 to 6 or whatever it is, you wind up working these really weird hours, like 6 in the morning till 10 at night, because you're on your own. There isn't a boss to go home. And I notice most organizations, when the boss goes home, other people start going home too. Well, that doesn't really happen when you're working at home. You are your own metaphysical source, and unfortunately, a lot of people, especially if they're somewhat career-oriented, will have a tendency to just work themselves to death. Okay? So that's another thing you need to think about as a manager, right? Yeah, you can give people freedom, and it sounds great that they're going to work extra hard, but do you not have a responsibility to also make sure they don't overwork themselves? Something to consider. Okay, we're going to look at the weirdest ontology in the next video, but for this video, if you liked it, give me a thumbs up, that's a like. Definitely hit that subscribe button, and I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next video.